everyone's morning going so far?
Exciting.
Please feel free to unmute
It's
and talk.
wild. Gemini and Sora.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I love your tweets, Twix. Like, been a whole year's progress in 1 hour.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like people were kind of waiting for Valentine's Day to pass, or they were very bored of Valentine's Day and they did a bunch of work yesterday.
Time to launch.
Exactly.
Yeah. Crazy how they all came out today, though. Yeah, we should like coordinate amongst themselves to stagnate or something.
The conspiracy OpenAI just has releases ready to go, and then whenever Google does something, then the OpenAI just does something else in response to drown it out.
Yeah,
strategic.
Kind of like,
sounds right to me.
Yeah,
it's very
tactical.
Yeah, although there was also Magic devs who released their race there, which is pretty interesting. Yeah. Okay, we might kick off now. I told the guys I would not spend too long doing an intro because I think we're all here to see Swix and Chris and the amazing fireside chat they have prepared. On my end, please have your cameras on and try and make this like as interactive as possible. Also, a huge thank you to Chris and Swix for their time. And yeah, I'll hand it over to Chris, who'll just go through the agenda for everything. And feel free to like type questions in the chat throughout, and I'll help moderate too. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Annie. I'm also not going to say too much, but the agenda will be, actually, sorry, I'll just introduce Swix for those people who may not know. So Swix runs Small AI and co-host of the Latent Space podcast, and also I also runs the AI Engineer event. So is that what it's called, Swix? Like the AI Engineer event? So last year was the summit, and coming up this year is the World's Fair, which I'm very excited about, and hopefully we can convince some more people to buy a ticket and a plane ticket and head over to SF. We've already got 3 or 4, I think, coming from this community. Hopefully there'll be more after today.
amazing.
And a little brief agenda. So Swix is going to take us through like a talk and like a blog post initially that he's done called The Rise of the AI Engineer, which was actually quite influential for me and was the instigation for me heading to that summit last year. We'll do a Q&A for about like 15 to 20 minutes. So if you guys have questions, please, as Annie said, pop them in the Slack and we'll ask those. And then we'll just do a little outro and talk about the AI Engineer World's Fair coming up at the end of June this year. And without further ado, Swix, I'll hand it over to you from here.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. That was fantastic. I see the first question coming in now about generative video, which is very, very of the moment right now. I think I should just share my screen, and hopefully that will work. I think that will probably do it here. And yeah, so I have like a 20-minute discussion on AI Engineer. This is something I have given before, but you know, I think it's useful context for people that want to do Q&A later, and then also, you know, we can always update with commentary on things. I think I see from Annie that it's recorded, so just let me know if anyone wants to talk about this after the fact as well, if you're watching this asynchronously. So I'll go into a quick dive. The impetus for writing the AI Engineer piece is obviously something that was a heavy lift for me, was really recognizing that there was this like foundational generational shift from the ML engineer researcher era or paradigm into production, that models were not only crossing over the into sort of very widespread interest and usability, but also that there are a number of factors, economic and social and technical, that constrain the amount of supply here and increase the amount of supply on the AI engineering side. You could, there are a lot of people that argue that all AI engineers are just software engineers. I think at the extreme limit, this is true, but everyone specializes. And the people who specialize do tend to want a separate identity. And the AI stack is going to grow over time, and the complexity is only going to grow over time. Therefore, you cannot just expect to do a good enough job by being a generalist. There will be a class of specialists that arise to serve this niche. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but that was the sort of broad impetus, and observing this trend, naming this trend, and then seeing the huge amount of traction and agreement about it, gave me a lot of confidence that we wanted to put on the summit and pivot the podcast, and for me, for at least the next 10 years of my career, to serve this growing industry. So I'll skip a lot of the preamble about like the interesting evidence of AI, but I'll just kind of go through like why this sort of production, like research to small lab to large scale deployment phase that we're going through. There's a very famous XKCD comic about machine learning where, like in order to do computer vision, it is easy for off-the-shelf stuff, and then it's a lot harder to do, some stuff that is not off the shelf. But that XKCD comic was in 2013, and fast forward 10 years later, we're now able to just prompt large foundation models and customize it towards the use cases that we want. And that is a very foundational shift over the last 10 years, that you used to only be able to use models for the explicit purpose that they were trained for. But the goal of machine learning has always been generalization, out of domain or out of context. And the beauty of foundation models is that they have done that, and they're promptable as well. I also think that the starting point has moved. So there was a post last year about how to break into AI engineering, which is, again, not instigated by me, but somebody is just like independently asking or trying to choose AI engineering as a starting point. But I noticed that the answers that were given on Hacker News for this question, how to break into AI engineering, were answers that I didn't really agree with. So the first answer was, okay, read all the machine learning fundamentals, right? Go do the end-to-end course, go to the fast AI course. The second answer was, it's just data engineering, so understand data warehouses, and just know your data really, really well. And I think both are obviously important. I've done the end-to-end courses, and I've worked in a data engineering pipelines company. However, I don't feel that they are the most important things for the current wave of AI. This is what you would do in the traditional ML engineering career path. And I think there's a qualitative difference in the successful people that I see in AI engineering that are not doing any of this. The most successful people I know in AI engineering have never bothered to learn what a transformer really is. They don't really have giant data warehouses, although they do have large amounts of data going on. But it's an inversion of what's important that is very fascinating to me. It's a qualitative difference in the type of people that are coming through that is very interesting and worth investigating, because this unlocks AI engineering for a completely new set of people. So I already introduced this graphic. I think what's missing from this graphic is that the relative populations are going to be very, very compelling. So let's say there's something about, there's maybe 5,000 to 10,000 good ML researchers in the world. There's maybe 50 to 500,000 good ML engineers and data scientists in the world. But there are 50 million to 100 million good software engineers in the world. Some percent of that are currently working on AI, mostly on the side, some full-time. And this will grow over time is my general argument. And I think that is that is the huge opportunity that was recognized by people like Andrej, that when he read my piece, he said that there's probably going to be significantly more AI engineers than ML engineers and LLM engineers. You can be quite successful in the role without ever training anything. And I think the important thing to recognize here is that this is the explicit goal of AI, that or AGI, that you can talk to an AI or you can use an AI without having trained it. That's the whole thing that we've been working towards. So why would they be at all surprised? And why would they be against the growing class of people who are effectively pro users of AI? They're not exactly training the models. They can customize it, they can fine tune it, but they're not training. And that's absolutely fine, and probably the way that, quote unquote, God intended it to be. And I think that's a very interesting point, that like this is very much like in line with like the plan, the grand plan of the universe, the long arc of history. Like, you're not fighting history, you're actually playing a huge part in it. The other thing I guess I'll observe is that like part of this is something that you cannot help, which is there's real economics issues going on here, that the people with the most money are hoarding GPUs, the people with the most money are hoarding people, right? All the top engineers, and like the way that the industry is going to distribute all these resources is going to be very unequal. You can blame capitalism, but really, honestly, this just the larger is better nature of AI, that like emergent scale means superlinear results for people that are working on like every incremental unit of data, of compute, of talent. And I think that is something that we're seeing come to bear very quickly. I will also say, like, it's not just a pure economics argument. Like, I make an economics argument because I have a background in econ and finance, and I do think that is more inevitable, or at least immediately understandable in terms of like how industries are organized. But there is still technological foundations. The main understandings that people should read, these are 3 papers that I'm highlighting here. One is the GPT-3 paper. If you haven't read it yet, you should, because that is a foundation of in-context learning, retrieval-augmented generation, and all that. And that's a basic idea that you can prompt a model to perform tasks that it wasn't exactly trained to do. And that was a fundamentally foundational shift than the previous models. Like, this effectively gave rise to the foundation model itself. The second image is from the segment anything model from Meta. And this is another foundation model, but in the image domain. And here they call it, instead of in-context learning, they call it zero-shot transfer, because there's no few-shot prompts in context to train on. But here it's generalizing out of distribution of the things that it was specifically trained on. And that is also very exciting. And then finally, I mean, this is the paper itself, language models of few-shot learners. So effectively, the rise of foundation models, the constraints of people and of data, is what I'm talking about here. Two final points. One is, if you're interested in startups and like the business of technology, the workflow that is being unlocked here is fundamentally very different than what you're used to in traditional sort of ML workflows. In traditional ML workflows, you collect a whole bunch of data, then you train the model, then you make a product. Well, with foundation models and with LLM-enabled AI engineers, this is all flipped, right? You make an MVP first, and if the MVP is successful, then you use that MVP to collect a whole bunch of data. And if that's successful, then you use your custom data to train a model, right? So it's a complete inversion of the time to market, that this is orders of magnitude faster. And therefore, like, there will be a lot of people investing money into this just because they can. And I think that's great. It's not to say that this is superior or inferior in any other way. I do think that you do need a very, very strong ML foundation to carve out a sustainable advantage. But maybe you bootstrap it by starting product data model first, and then using data model to make a new product. And that becomes a virtuous cycle in and of itself. But it's clear to me, at least, where you should start in the age of foundation models. You should start with the products first, not everything else. The final piece is just a pure numbers game. The fact that a lot of foundation models are available via API means that for once, machine learning is now language agnostic, programming language agnostic. It used to be pure Python, and now anyone that can effectively call an API can now wield a language model, primarily JavaScript. And the orders of estimates are that the number of Python developers is roughly equal, or maybe slightly smaller than the number of JavaScript developers, and maybe like the rest of the long tail of other languages that I don't particularly care about, but they're still important and they exist. But effectively, the number of people wielding AI now has effectively doubled or maybe tripled overnight, and that's very interesting. So the last point, or the last section I'll cover, which is sort of the engineering section. So like, why engineers? Like, why not prompt engineering? Why not any other sort of elements of AI? Why do I have this like hard opinion on engineering supremacy? It's not just because I am an engineer. So like I foundationally agree with it. I think engineers have a strong appreciation for the progress that's come along so far. So you should be aware of this paradigm of software 1.0 to 2.0. There's very influential essays 7 years ago now from Andrej, going from sort of hand-coded if, then, else statements to machine-learned weights on models that with enough parameters that you can model any arbitrary if, then, else statements, allowing for you to model a lot more different kinds of problems than you could if you hand-coded every single thing. To me, this is also very comparable to the differences or the philosophical difference between intelligent design, where you sort of have a all-knowing, omnipotent person designing every little detail, towards comparing towards evolution, where you just kind of throw things at the wall, and over time you learn what works in the environment that you give it. So the difference between software 1.0 and 2.0 is well understood, but now we're always talking about the evolution towards software 3.0. What Andrej says here is software 3.0 is about prompt designing rather than designing a data set. I slightly disagree. I think 3.0 is very much actually going to involve a lot of code. And so the central thesis here for why the AI engineer and not any other sort of AI professional is that the AI using code is way more powerful than AI just using language, right? So basically, this is also, I also call this the 1 + 2 = 3 thesis. That code generation and using code to wield and orchestrate AI is going to be very important. You can see the growth of this. Here's a brief history. It's really easy to cover because it's so short. In September 2022, we started experimenting with plugging sandboxes to LLMs. And then by June 2023, we had Code Interpreter in general availability, doing all sorts of graphs on demand for you whenever you want to throw in a CSV or an Excel sheet. I think this is also, if you kind of plot this in terms of the incremental capabilities of each model, that we effectively are adding new capabilities as we discover them. And I think from now onwards, every single large language model is going to want to be able to wield code, to generate JSON, to do function calling, anything like that, in order to achieve its goals. Like, this is part of the AGI toolkit. We'll talk about the LLM OS later on. So yeah, here actually we're going to talk about it here. So there's a fundamental split in how much you use code, right? A lot of apps like a ChatGPT, minus the code interpreter, a lot of apps are code shell, like a thin layer around the LLM. So the LLM is the core of the intelligence, and the code around it is mostly just UI and like affordances and maybe some memory and orchestration for RAG. I'm seeing a big shift in terms of when you want to scale things up, that you will start to run into the limits of intelligence. Like you realize that these models are actually not smart enough to do the thing that you're trying to get it to do, or at least they're doing it too expensively, or they're doing it too slowly. For any number of reasons, you actually want to take business logic out of the LLM layer into the code layer, so much so that you might actually you might flip the order. You might actually put code at the core of it, and then put the LLMs as like small little sort of intelligence augmentation onto a code-centric paradigm. And I think that is a big refactor that happens for a lot of people as they build AI products. I actually featured this as initially in my write-up as the anatomy of autonomy. I just like that sort of rhyming schema over there. But I would say that probably the most updated version of this in November is the LLM OS, that you would have an LLM as your quote unquote CPU, but it will connect to all these sort of code-enabled tooling. Part of which is, let's just say, image generation and video generation. These are all just tools in the toolkit. So maybe I'll just kind of finalize or end this chat with what I think central problems of the AI engineer are. I think that every industry you talk a lot about solutions, or like, oh, I'm a React engineer, or I'm a JavaScript engineer, I'm a cloud DevOps person. You should identify less of solutions, because the solutions will come and go, but the problems will always remain. They'll always get deeper. And so I always want to organize people based on problems that we all share, because then we can get together, discuss problems, and if the solution fits, then we adopt it. If not, we'll try to make our own, or at least commiserate together about how bad it is. So the main problems are AI UX, AI tooling, AI dev tools, open source hosting and infra, fine-tuning, and then agents. And we'll talk about like the landscape of all these. And I'm really inspired by like my landscape education, by the data stack. I used to work in data engineering. So I used to work in Airbyte, which is a data pipes company that connects warehouses and business intelligence layers. I will say that the software 3.0 stack, or the sort of AI engineer stack, is breaking down into a sort of similar thing, with the one separation that there's a very, very clear distinction between the closed foundation model labs and the open source hosts. So some of these numbers are out of date now. OpenAI is now worth $86 billion. Anthropic is now worth $18 billion. The rest of the numbers are updated accordingly. But it's still roughly similar, that there's a base model layer, and then there's a sort of RAG stack, and then there's a user interface layer that we have to figure out what it looks like. So focusing on the first one, we really have this foundational split between closed model labs that are effectively bundling research and infrastructure. So you can call APIs from an OpenAI, Anthropic, a little bit of Inflection, a little bit of Cohere, and obviously Google, so on and so forth. But then you can also take an open source model and host it on anywhere else where these people don't do research, they do sort of fundamental infrastructure as a service. And I think, to me, that's the way that part of the landscape works out. We can go deeper into that, because they all have interesting stories. The second part is the RAG stack, which is people orchestrating that layer of knowledge and specific code tooling. This is the most AI engineer heavy stack, because there's no research to be done here. It's just a lot of hardcore engineering. The primary players are going to be the vector databases and the frameworks, and these are the main players in each. We can talk about that. To me, the big aha moment for RAG is understanding that it does play a central role, an important role, between querying just the pure LLM's weights, like the things that it's been trained on and knows, and between searching for something, like in the classic sort of search engine context. It is somewhere in between a search engine and memory. And I think that is actually very, very interesting in terms of understanding the sources of intelligence. Like when you ask your friend a question, one, they can consult their own memory, which is imperfect, and they might hallucinate things or not know things. Or two, they can go out and search for it and then come back to you with an answer. And that's effectively what RAG is. Lastly, I should spend a brief comment on the ops stack. This is the LLM ops stack, that basically anything that's AI engineering but not in the central RAG part of the stack. There's a lot of people doing prompts management, and then there's a lot of people doing LLM API call tracking effectively. Like here's anything where there's a landing page that kind of looks like this, where it tracks your spending and your calls and all that. There's a bunch of startups in that space. It's hard to tell which is going to win, because they all look the same. Finally, it's the sort of UI layer. I basically left this open. ChatGPT was effectively the first very successful UI for AI. The second one I would probably consider Midjourney inside of Discord to be a very successful UI, even though it's got a lot of pros and cons as to like what it could ultimately look like. Midjourney did eventually end up building a web interface because obviously the limitations of Discord are substantial. I do think that the two most interesting companies here are Vercel and Retool, both of which I talked to on the podcast. Vercel, you can consider the split like Vercel is for external facing AI UI, and then Retool is for internal facing, like internal tooling AI UI. That's it. You can kind of generate and create in a low code context, whereas Vercel is very much high code. And I think like that is super interesting if you want to sort of get into that sort of what is the value of this, because like none of these are like have standalone existing value. But it's clear that the people who are least technical are going to interact with this, and then the rest of us engineers are going to be existing at the intersection between the foundation models and the ultimate end user interface. So that's going to be super interesting. The last thing here I've commented out because they've been very hyped, and it's not clear what the story is here now going forward, is AI agents. We can talk about that even more, but if you're interested in AI agents, you should definitely read Lilian Wang's posts on basically the recap of all the relevant research. You can just search LLM powered autonomous agents by Lilian Wang, and you can kind of see that in her blog. I would say all of that mostly still stands today. The agents field has not really moved since about a year ago. Finally, I'll end off with what I'm working on and where you should start if you're looking into AI engineering for the first time. We're creating this course, this email course. It's free. For me, it's just a way to have something to point people to when you're like, hey, I'm completely new. I've been out of the loop. Where do I start? Yeah. I point them to LSU, Latent Space University. Here it's here the basically challenge I set for myself is, if you had 1 hour a day for 7 days, what would I tell you to go learn and try out, right? And these are the 7 things. I would tell you to go try out the API, prompt tooling, code generation, image generation, speech to text, open source models, and AI agents. You can get all of that done in 7 days, and then get reasonably conversant and up to date on what the state of the art for each is. Like the intros for each of these days and courses give you enough context if you read the whole thing. Okay, and then finally, what I'm working on is AI Engineer Conference. The next one is AI Engineer World's Fair in June in San Francisco. It's going to be 4 times bigger than the last one. The last one was really well reviewed. And we're trying to make it international. So if you're coming in from Australia, you're definitely super welcome. We have people flying in from Singapore, from France, from Germany, and London, and Argentina as well. So yeah, going to be reasonably international, I would say, over there. Latent Space is the podcast, free forever. Got lots of interesting guests. The most notable ones was the one with George Hotz and Chris Latner and Jeremy Howard. Just lots of interesting guests if you want to understand the people side of AI with a technical bent. I would say that we occupy that niche really, really well. And I think that would be about it for my presentation. I'm happy. I obviously have slides to answer more questions if you want to prompt me to go into further detail. But thanks for having me.
That was awesome, mate. Thank you very much. And again, thank you. I know you've done that talk a few times. So you said you never get bored of it, which is good. I actually think it's evergreen, right? It's super influential, and it is today as it was in July last year or when you wrote that blog post initially. As I said at the start, it was
the valuation numbers because going on.
Exactly. I'll say a little anecdote on my side. So I started a startup at the beginning of last year in the AI space in software requirements, and I started feeling a little bit like a imposter because I'm a software engineer, but I don't have classic AI ML background at all. And I was like, I didn't feel like I belonged in the world. So I think this is a talk and a blog post which is very good for a lot of software engineers to hear. So we'll certainly be sharing it. I'll have one quick question, and then I'll go to the group so I don't hog it. But you did write that piece, and as you say, you're updating the slides a little bit. But compared to July last year, what's changed? In terms of the AI engineer, do you think much has changed in terms of where we should be starting, or it's pretty much how you ended that presentation?
I think I designed that post to last for 10 years, or with a sort of 10-year shelf in mind. So most of that is still true today. I would say the things that I've incrementally updated on is the ability or the importance of AI engineers to go into the fine-tuning layer. That there is more crossover of ML engineering in AI software than I was thinking. A lot of people are going to try to get by prompting APIs and doing RAG, and they can get so far for sure. And I think that would be the bulk of the work this year, maybe next year. But if you want to really stand out, or you want the sort of low-hanging fruit of abnormal performance today, go into open source models and go into fine-tuning them for a specific use case, because there the competition is virtually zero, because you have to be this interesting intersection of someone with enough ML expertise to do those things and someone with enough software engineer and sort of startup-y tech business products understanding to apply that skill set to something that people care about. It is actually surprisingly easy to exceed GPT-4 performance when you do that, because GPT-4 is trying to be general, whereas all you got to do is be specific on something. And so the specific thing can be very simple. What Find did, P-H-I-N-D, that's a YC startup that we interviewed. What Find did was they wanted a custom model for code searching, and they took an open source code model and fine-tuned it for a few days and ended up beating GPT-4 on some very, very simple metrics. Not that hard. It's just that OpenAI is not trying to do that, and you have lots of opportunity out there. It's not a game where only the big players are going to win. And to me, that's very encouraging. One thing I love about AI or generative AI in general is that it is very positive sum, like that other people can win and you can win too. And it doesn't actually detract anything from anyone else just because it's so blue ocean right now. So I do like that compared to other fields I've been in where it's been very competitive, like in finance.
Yep. And actually, I'm going to ask one more. I think it was in that piece where you mentioned that AI engineers or proposed that they'll be one of the highest wanted jobs in the next 10 years. So you're now sort of talking about, maybe getting a bit more into the fine tuning. What do you think generally the biggest challenges for AI engineers will be over, let's not say 10, let's go over the next few years?
Challenges. Everything I shared in that slide with the shared problems, defining the optimal UX of AI, hosting models open source and fine-tuning them, building agents that actually work reliably for a reasonable amount of cost and don't disappoint the user with like how little they can actually do. Those are all enormously challenging. I definitely know I have others that I forgot that I haven't mentioned, but it was in that slide. Let me pull out the slide again.
Yep.
The problem, central problem. Oh yeah. So AI UX, AI tooling, AI productivity, dev tools, open source hosting, fine tuning evals, and then agents. So AI tooling is all the sort of prompt engineering, structured response, and vector database and RAG tooling that I talked about. And then productivity and dev tools is something that is kind of meta. It's kind of like self-serving in a way, like engineers building tools for engineers is always going to be a limited audience thing. But if you enable other builders, that can be very fulfilling yourself and financially very rewarding as well, because there are plenty of developers out there that want better tooling. Like we can never have good tooling out there that eliminates the cognitive strain of all the code that we still have to write.
Yep, definitely. Maybe we'll open up to questions. I'm just scrolling back. All right. Actually, so Nissan, I think you raised your hand. We can start with you, and then we'll go back through the chat.
Okay, awesome. Hi, great talk, Swix. I'm really happy to have heard it. One thing I was interested in, so you saw Jeremy Howard launched this new type of startup where it's sort of research-led, but towards a practical application. It actually lends itself to something I'm studying, which is like, it's less skill to get into AI as an engineer, as in like academics rigor, but you still need the academic rigor. How are you going to see those types of organizations, like what Jeremy is trying to do, where you're blending research and practical to get this new evolution of a research engineer who is more focused on the real world, but still has that foundation? Do you think that's a path that we should look at if we're coming in without the academic side, that we need to go backwards as we grow in our career to start getting into research, or don't we need that anymore?
Gotcha. I feel like the question and the premise of the question are two different things. So I'll preface this with, we actually interviewed Jeremy on my podcast. If you go to the NeurIPS startups recap on the podcast, we actually had the first interview of Answer AI, basically because my co-host was the guy who led the round into Answer AI. And we had Jeremy on like just before that. That was part of the conversation for like investing into the company, like putting $10 million into that. So if you want to hear directly from Jeremy about Answer AI, definitely go check that podcast out. There was I think that was the top 3 podcasts of the year. That one. The second question is just more about, and then okay, so a little bit about Jeremy. He is much more on the research side than you or I. Like most engineers, most software engineers are not going to come close in terms of closeness to research, and he's not going to come close to you on practical business stuff. He invented ULM Fit, which is the paradigm for fine tuning. He created Fast AI, which is yes, an easy way to learn AI really quickly and a good framework. But he's just basically a lot closer to research than you or I will ever be. And I don't think that Answer AI is a good model for most AI engineers to pursue. Now, you're asking is, should people want to pursue the research engineer route or the practical AI research lab route that Answer AI is proposing itself to be? And I'm saying, sure, if that's the career path that you want. It's not specifically the audience that I envision. It's not specifically the growth industry that I envision for AI engineering, because it is a very different bar. You are foundationally doing research there. There's a lot of them, in history. Obviously, Xerox PARC is like the key one that everyone tries to be and focuses on. But it's a different kind of job than being a software engineer.
Thanks.
Awesome. I think there was 2 questions in the chat, but I think Kat has asked about agents, which I knew would come up. But she asked, is it worth creating an agent, or should I focus on the software to string actions together and gate the next steps? So I think broadly about, is it worth creating agents at this stage?
The problem with agents is also that it's just a buzzword that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when I read this question, is it worth creating an agent, or should I focus on the software to string actions together and get the next step? The second clause in that statement, a lot of people will call that an agent. So you're basically saying, is it worth creating an agent, or should I create an agent? So
I guess the fundamental difference is, do I create a prompt that guides the agent through all the different steps, or do I create software as the if-thens that then kind of creates that flow?
You're going to want to do both.
With the AI still, but yeah.
Yes, I can suggest a hybrid approach where you have the prompts for the LLM to suggest the next step, but then require user confirmation. You can write software 1.0 manual code to verify or validate the stuff that the LLM is coming up with. But you basically can there's a spectrum of how much human control and how much code control you want. And it's not a pure either or. There's gradations in between that you can choose in terms of your sort of design decisions there. I would say the most compelling thing that you can try today, which I'm very excited about because this has been, Flo previewed this at my conference last year, but he actually launched it today, which is Lindy AI. lindy.ai. They literally just released this morning, so now I can talk about it because I've been trying at alpha in preview. And what that does is a little bit similar to ChatGPT, but with a more of an agent feel, in the sense that it generates a plan for itself and then asks you for confirmation by default to execute the next steps of the plan. But there's also, you can toggle off save mode so that it doesn't ask you for anything and it just goes off and does stuff on its own. And so that's more agentic. And I do think that there's just degrees of control that you want to offer to people. Some people, especially if it's like a low risk thing where it's read only, where it's high tolerance for failure or hallucination, meaning it's more creative field maybe, or a field where there's just many answers that could be potentially correct, then you want to give it more autonomy. In other fields where there's low tolerance for failures and there's irreversible decisions or actions that can be made. Maybe you want to give it much less autonomy. And that's all fine. That's all within the design space. And you as an engineer can completely choose that path. Isn't that amazing? I just think like, this is what the nature of agent discussion is now. You can no longer get easy wins by saying, I am creating an auto GPT that will increase my net worth through a vague goal. That is now no longer the bar. That was a very, very low bar. And now people are like, okay, how are you doing it? And this is something I can see myself using on a day-to-day basis. Because a lot of people create flashy demos, and I think after about a year of those flashy demos, people are tired of that and they want to see things that they can actually use on a day-to-day basis.
Agree. I think Alexander, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it's an incredible group of people that we have here. So I thought I'd share with you all a thought experiment that's been cooking in my brain, and you kind of covered it in the presentation a little bit when you talked about how AI of yesteryear used to be the domain of academics, and now it's being kind of open source, open access via APIs. It's no longer open source, but also much easier to access in terms of distribution through APIs. And the thought experiment I've been having is if we're at this kind of infancy of where AI models are going, especially the big ones with the large budgets to do huge training, is that going to change the way that we would interact with it? And specifically, if we look at how REST APIs were kind of like, you'd set an endpoint and then you query it with the right parameters and you get the parameters back. And then we went to stuff like GraphQL, where it kind of creates the endpoint in a dynamic way. What's the likelihood we're actually going to get to an interface in the not too distant future where there's an AI large language model style interface for API endpoints exclusively, where you kind of just go, cool, I need this kind of information, give it to me in almost like automated function calling in some respects. I've kind of been cooking around with this idea in my head, and I'm just wondering if anyone else is with me on that crazy journey.
Yeah, I can give you a couple of relevant rabbit holes to dive down on, because you're not the only one that has done this, and obviously anyone else on the call, if you're working on similar things, you should connect with Alex on this. The first one that comes to mind is GPT backend, or GPT is all you need for backend. This is a very old project now, more than a year old. They won a hackathon that a lot of people are talking about. I think the creators of that project ended up not going anywhere with it, but that was the first where instead of calling a regular API, you would create a prompt for that backend. The second one would be text is the universal interface, which is an essay that Rune wrote, T-Sizzle on Twitter, and he published it on the Scale AI blog. And that one is more talking about this vision where between systems, we should not just be doing like this sort of 50-year-old paradigm of get, put, post, delete requests that are strictly formatted with like a body and like some kind of JSON that maybe conforms in open API schema. Really, you should send text, and the two systems can communicate and figure things out. I would say the related talk to watch for that is also the Brett Victor talk on the future of programming, which is a talk that he did at a Dropbox conference in 2012. Brett Victor alert, he's a huge nerd trap for anyone into the future of programming and alternative paradigms to today. But in that talk, he talks about exactly what Rune talks about in Text's universal interface, just way before anyone else did. And he quoted people that were talking about this 50 years ago. And it's just fascinating to see that this has been a dream that people have wanted. I would say like the most appealing thing about this to me is that this is the only ultimate interface for us to talk to quote unquote an alien, or the only ultimate interface for us to talk across time. Like imagine like if you dug up a box 100 years from now that like would spit something out in a format that nobody 100 years from now would understand. As long as they spoke natural language, we could both sides of the of the communication gap could interface and configure themselves to talk to each other once they agree on a standard. And the only way to make that robust is to have intelligence on both sides to agree on a communicated a spec. In some way, Arrival or like any sort of alien first contact movie has to deal with this, that the first person that you bring along when you're about to meet an alien is a linguist or a mathematician, because those are the two ways where you sort of can finally agree on something to communicate about. The reason I'm personally a skeptic of all this approach is just it's expensive. You're going to initially, like, you're going to show great demos of two systems who have no prior agreements talking to each other to do that. And then finally, you're going to converge on code, something that looks like code. You're going to independently reinvent code. And then you're going to agree to just talk in that. And you're going to step down from an intelligence layer to a non-intelligent layer that is just machine calls again. So effectively, you're going to go from LLM core, which is what you're proposing. You're going to step down to code core, where code is the primary thing that's running for cost reasons, for latency reasons, for all sorts of practicality reasons, right? Like the lack of hallucination when it comes to code. For all those reasons, you're going to want to standardize and formalize, and that is the domain of code primarily. So that's my whole spiel. I wonder if you have any response or if anyone else has a take.
No massive kind of. I think your analysis on it is quite similar to where I'm kind of landing on it. Is that I think that the 50-year-old architecture of RESTful API is going to fundamentally shift, and I actually see there being almost like a translation layer that may kind of bolt in. I don't think that we're going to be able to rewire the internet. I don't think we're going to be able to change a lot of these legacy systems or kind of migrate it in any short period of time. So I actually can see there being an entire category of AI products that tailor to this kind of universal adapter style interface that kind of sits between these systems, language agnostic, kind of logic agnostic, and just kind of like is this translation layer, really harnessing that contextual intelligence of large language models. So I'm not actively working this space. It's just more of a thought experiment that I like to play, and we'll see if it kind of comes to fruition.
Yeah, I would say, like, it's worth a try. I haven't seen anyone really tackle this, and all progress comes from unreasonable people, right? People who are trying things that no one else thinks will work. So don't let me discourage you from just trying it. Like, take a weekend and try it. That's all I'll say.
All progress comes from unreasonable people. I love it. So we're a little bit over time here. There's a couple more questions, but maybe we should call it Swix, if that's probably best. Maybe a few minutes, Swix, if you could give us an overview of the AI Engineer World's Fair and the sort of stuff that will be going on, if you can talk about that, and maybe we'll convince some people to head over.
And Graham, I see you have your hand raised. Just type a question in there and I'll answer it. For AI Engineer World's Fair, that's going to be June 25th to 27th. Basically, we held our first conference last year. It was 500 people in person and then 17,000 people online. We're trying to go 4 times bigger this year. Really, the main constraint is just budget. I don't have that much money, and these things are expensive, particularly in San Francisco. But you got to do AI conferences in San Francisco. And we're trying to do more tracks this time. We're trying to do better workshops. The workshops that we did last year, I'm not proud of. That the AV was bad. So we're trying to do like better recording and then more tracks, focus on things that people really want to figure out. So for example, I have one track which I'm a little bit afraid to do because it's very corporate and therefore potentially very boring. It's the AI in Fortune 500 track, where we're like, okay, like there's all these like seed stage startups, there's all these indie hacker projects on Twitter going viral, but nobody's making money from this thing, right? And the answer is no. Like there really are people making tens to hundreds of millions of dollars at billion-dollar companies, putting these things into very, very big scale. So let's have a track that learns from those people, but let's not also forget about the hackers that are working on like the cutting edge stuff as well. So I'll have a track for that. I want to track on evals, the sort of the eat your vegetables of AI, where everyone wants like the flashy 2-minute demo, but then no one wants to focus on like rigorous evaluations of stats. So I want to sort of bring that up first and foremost. I also had a huge gap last year on multimodality, and I think this year, as evidenced by today, a lot of people are very interested in generative video, generative audio, all that sort of good stuff. So we have a dedicated track for that. Yeah, lots of stuff. I honestly don't even know because we're still planning it and still organizing it. But come join us if you want. I envision me doing this for 10 years. So this will be a journey, and I think if you want like a single place to catch up on like the biggest updates of the year, I'm trying to make this that place.
Awesome. Graham, do you want to ask your question if we've got the time?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, it might be a long answer, so just feel free to not answer if it's too long. But yeah, basically, I was just wondering how far we are on like I don't know, online learning or real-time learning, as opposed to kind of like you have training time and then inference. So like I know an agent's supposed to be like going inference in a loop, but yeah, just like learning like a human.
Okay. How far are we? We are not far at all. Meaning progress has not progressed very much. A lot of people always talk about continuous learning as the next frontier, and then it never happens. So that's the depressing take. The more optimistic version of this is that we're starting to see interesting things like online LLMs, which was shipped by Perplexity. Perplexity is doing a lot of partnerships with like new startups like Rabbit and Frame, but also like existing players. I think like they just announced one with Slack the other day. So basically LLMs with no knowledge cutoffs. It's actually very stupidly easy under the hood. It's literally a search engine plus an LLM just glommed on top and with like, as low latency as you can possibly make it. Is that online learning? Kind of. It's not really. It's just search engine, but it's a form of online learning, sure. What you really want to get to is fully updating the weights of the model with all the new information coming in. Most people don't actually want that. They say they want that, but they don't actually want that. I'm researching online learning, and I myself am like, I don't think this is like that interesting. Also because like you want to care about the distribution of your data. So a lot of times, for example, online learning, you're going to get data which you already have a lot of samples of, and getting more of those samples doesn't actually help you at all. You actually want sample diversity. You actually want synthetic generated data to really go after, like in an active learning sort of way, things that you're weak on, that that you're weak on. And so a lot of that is better done in a clean lab sort of offline setting than it is done in an online setting. Like online just is a complication that overvalues time or like recency at the sacrifice of things like data cleanliness, data diversity or distribution, anything like that. All of which probably matter more for your model of the data. So yeah, people like real time is one of these like silver serpents. It's just kind of like knowledge graphs. Like everyone's like, yeah, obviously that would be better, and then like it doesn't happen for a variety of practical and then quite legitimate reasons as to like how useful is this actually. So I'm not a hater of it because like it's always a mistake to underestimate these things, but like there's real reasons why it hasn't really kicked off yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Cool. Well, maybe we'll wrap it up there. We've gone a little bit over. But Switch, thank you so much for your time. Build Club is a bunch of AI builders, and we're trying to help each other ship and get our products out there. So it's very much talking to the right audience. We've got hundreds of members, Annie. Is it like over 500 now?
Yeah, almost 600.
Yeah, and most of them might be in their day job right now. So we'll definitely share this video, and I'll certainly get a lot from it. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, mate.
Thank you.
My absolute pleasure.
So what we'll do is I'll drop a thread in our community Slack, and if you guys have any like more questions and like maybe write down your key learnings there. Swix, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions or like wants to follow up on anything, would it be okay for us to maybe add you to our Slack or like email? Like, what's the best way?
I'm happy to join. I just may not check it very often because I have 200 slides.
Yeah, okay.
But just add me, whenever like something time sensitive is important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
awesome.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, guys. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.